Imagine trying to run a country like it's a game of Jenga, where every few years, the entire stack of blocks collapses. That's been the political reality for the little nation of Guinea-Bissau. In its short life, it's faced so much chaos. But beneath all that is a stunning, waterlogged landscape and a culture so resilient that women still rule on the sacred Bijagos Islands. You're about to find out how this country holds it all together. So keep watching. Believe it or not, the area that is now Guinea-Bissau has been home to people for at least 1,000 years. Initially, we had these hunters and gatherers who later became animist farmers, growing rice using iron tools. Although things really kicked off around the 12th century with the arrival of the Fulani people, they were semi-nomadic herders who began settling in the region. Then, in the 13th century, the massive Mali Empire expanded into this entire region. So to manage its vast territory and keep the gold, slaves and marine salt flowing toward the interior, the empire established secondary kingdoms. And for Guinea-Bissau, this state was called Kaabu, which was controlled by local kings known as pharims. Now, the agricultural communities often found themselves in a tough spot, subordinate to Kaabu's economic and military needs, so it wasn't exactly a harmonious existence. Then the 15th century happened, and this was when the European world sailed in, specifically the Portuguese explorers and traders. One of the earliest guys was Nuno Tristão. He was looking for slaves in the 1440s, but the coastal inhabitants weren't having it. The result? Nuno Tristão was killed around 1446 or 1447. Despite that initial resistance, the Portuguese managed to monopolise the trade along the Upper Guinea coast for about a century, until the French, Spanish and English decided to join in. The Portuguese heavily relied on the nearby Cape Verde Islands. Cape Verde served as a secure offshore post for trading everything, like slaves, ivory, cola nuts, beeswax, all coming out of Africa, and manufactured goods, firearms, and rum going in. Imagine, tens of thousands were exported to markets like Cuba and northeastern Brazil. Now, back on the mainland, the political balance was shifting. In 1867, the Fulani overthrew the Kaabu Kingdom, changing the political landscape and tragically altering the slave trade rosters. The Portuguese finally began to abandon the practice of slaving by the late 1870s, but it was swiftly replaced by an oppressive system of forced labour and meagre wages to pay colonial taxes. Then, in 1879, the long-lasting joint administration of Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau was finally split, and it officially became Portuguese Guinea. This all happened in the context of the Greater Scramble for Africa. The Guinean people were definitely not consulted, and they resisted whenever they could. But to satisfy the new rule of effective occupation, the Portuguese launched a brutal pacification campaign led by Captain João Teixeira Pinto from 1913 to 1915, using an African mercenary force. The mass killings and severe punishments brought widespread outcry, but the campaigns continued well into the 1930s. And just when you think it couldn't get worse, World War II happened. Africans who fought for the colonial powers came back with military and political experience, fueling nationalist movements. The real turning point came in 1956, when a group of Cape Verdeans founded the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, or PAIGC for short, headed by a revolutionary named Amilcar Cabral. The PAIGC initially wanted a peaceful path to independence, but in 1959, when the Portuguese responded to a dock workers' strike with deadly violence, killing and wounding numerous demonstrators, Cabral and the party realised a peaceful protest wouldn't work. So in January 1963, they launched an armed campaign. Despite facing large numbers of Portuguese soldiers and advanced military tech, the PAIGC steadily gained control, eventually holding about 2/3 of the country. Then, tragedy struck. On January 20th, 1973, Amilcar Cabral was assassinated. But despite the devastating loss, the movement didn't stop. So, on September 24th, 1973, they unilaterally declared independence. But it wasn't until September 10th, 1974, that Portugal formally recognised it. After that, Amilcar Cabral's half-brother, Luís de Almeida Cabral, became the first president of Guinea-Bissau. The initial plan was to unify the country with Cape Verde, but that idea was short-lived. Why, you ask? Well, in 1980, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, João Bernardo Vieira, led a military coup, ousting Cabral, which in turn severed the military and political unity between the two nations. And that coup, my friends, was just the first domino. Because Vieira's ascent to power faced huge economic problems. The state-planned economy was totally failing, which didn't help anything, right? Even though the country tried to switch to a democratic, multi-party system in the early 1990s, and Vieira actually won the first free presidential election in 1994, that underlying political sickness just wouldn't quit. Then things became worse in 1998, when a military mutiny sparked a civil war that eventually pushed Vieira out in May 1999. And after that, more bad news. The country was caught in a chaotic cycle, seeing coups and instability in 2003, 2005, and 2012. Can you believe that political upheaval? It's wild. It wasn't until the 2014 election of José Mario Vaz that they finally got a break. He actually made history by being the first president to complete a full constitutional term in 2019. Then more recently, in 2020, Umaro Sissoko Embalo took office, which officially ended 46 years of control by either the PAIGC party or the military. But even his rule hasn't been smooth, because in 2023, he dissolved the parliament after a shootout, calling it a failed coup attempt. So yeah, the struggle for stability is still very much ongoing. But let's hold off on that for now as we move into a lighter topic, geography. If you've ever looked at a map, you know Guinea-Bissau is nestled on the Atlantic coast of West Africa. It's actually one of the smallest nations on the continent, covering an area of about 36,125 square kilometres, or roughly 13,948 square miles. It borders Senegal to the north and Guinea to the east and south. And to the west, that's where the Atlantic Ocean is. Now, the first thing you notice about the physical geography is how low-lying it is. This country is practically flat, and because of this very gentle terrain, the ocean's influence is huge. We're talking about tidal waters that can reach as far as 100 kilometres, or over 62 miles inland. Plus, the environment here is largely made up of these amazing, nutrient-rich swamps and marshlands, especially around the major waterways. You've got key rivers like the Geba, the Korubol, and the Kachiu, all draining the country and playing a massive role in travel, commerce, and daily life. You'll see huge swaths of what are called Guinean mangrove swamps that really define the interior landscape. But as impressive as that is, you know what's even more exciting? The islands. Extending off the coast is one of the country's biggest treasures, the Bijagos archipelago. It's a stunning group of about 18 major islands and dozens of smaller ones, and it includes the incredible Orango Islands National Park. It's a place of immense biodiversity and unique local cultures, and honestly a travel vlogger's dream. Then, if you head inland moving east, the landscape starts to change. You transition from the dense mangrove swamps into a more open environment where savanna forests start to appear. And finally, if you keep heading to the southeastern part of the country, you hit the highest ground, which is dominated by the Fouta Djallon Plateau. Here you'll find gentle hills and small mountains, with elevations around 180 metres, or about 590 feet. The highest point in the entire country is an unnamed hill, which reaches about 300 metres, or a humble 984 feet. It's not exactly Everest, but it's the peak of Guinea-Bissau. Okay, so that's the lay of the land. Now I want to go in depth and talk about something more serious: politics and economy. Since gaining full independence in 1974, Guinea-Bissau has been caught in a relentless cycle of instability. We're talking about more than a dozen coups, attempted coups, mutinies, and assassinations. That tells you everything you need to know about how fragile the system is. And the latest big shake-up happened recently, in late November 2025, when the military removed President Umaro Sissoko Embalo. Why? Because his rule was heavily criticised as increasingly authoritarian. He dissolved the opposition-dominated parliament twice, citing persistent and unresolvable differences, and a subsequent attempted coup. Then he also stayed in office past the legal expiration of his term. And this kind of sudden unconstitutional change is loudly condemned by groups like the African Union and the Regional Economic Bloc, ECOWAS, because it signals a fundamental failure, perennial weaknesses in institutions, and a deep lack of public trust. Meaning, When leaders fail, the military steps in. So why can't they get it together? Well, political chaos and a weak economy go hand in hand. Guinea-Bissau is a small nation with a population of about 2.2 million people, and agriculture is its backbone. But it's a monocrop economy. Cashew nuts are king, accounting for over 80 to 93% of the country's total exports. Taking that into account, let's check out the numbers. So the GDP was around $2.12 billion in 2024. And growth is decent, at about 4.8% in 2024. But their debt is huge, climbing to an estimated 82.3% of GDP in 2024. And for most people, life is a struggle. An estimated 67% of the population lives in abject poverty. Infrastructure is crumbling, and youth unemployment is a major issue. The core problem is simple. The chronic political instability, all those coups and corruption, periodically stops any real policy making. So it's impossible to execute long-term economic plans when the government could be toppled next year. This chaos has also made the country a major transit point for drug smuggling in West Africa, creating a dangerous shadow economy that further corrupts the elite. Now, the hope lies in the young, vibrant population and its untapped natural resources. International partners like ECOWAS insist that any new government must prioritise stability, fight corruption, and diversify the economy away from its reliance on cashews. But the contradiction remains. Decades after independence, the gap between Guinea-Bissau's huge potential and its difficult reality is still painfully wide. Luckily, Guinea-Bissau's culture remains vibrant. And the first thing you notice is that it's a genuine melting pot. It's rich and colourful thanks to all the different tribes, languages, and customs here. So, despite these big differences, Guineans are generally super accepting of their varied backgrounds, which creates this unique cultural harmony. Now let's quickly meet the dominant groups. The Balanta are the largest group. Their name means those who resist, showing that tenacious spirit we talked about in history. They're the owners of the land, primarily farmers whose soul is in the lush rice fields, and they have a deep connection with nature and their ancestors. Next, the Fula, or Fulani. They're known for being historically nomadic, focusing on livestock. They're a hierarchical society and are predominantly Muslim, which is a key element that connects them with other groups. Then you have the Manjako, who live near the coast in the mangrove regions. Their life is tied to the water, and they are organised into matrilineal clans. Their culture is heavily influenced by animism, where the spirits of nature play a vital role. Finally, the Mandinka. They're respected for their skills in trade, crafts, and their rich tradition of music and powerful speaking. Like the Fula, they share Islam as their main religion, and beyond those four, the rest of the population includes other African groups, and a mix of African and Portuguese descent, plus a Cape Verdean minority. Now, you absolutely can't talk about this culture without zooming in on the Bijago people, who live out on the islands. Even though they're a minority, their culture is utterly unique because they practice matrilineality. So what does that mean? Simply put, women are at the core of society. They control the land, own the homes, determine inheritance, and hold substantial influence over the community. Bijago women are even responsible for most of the fishing and farming. On top of that, they're also known for their amazing traditional ceremonies, which show off their deep spiritual connection with nature. And when there are ceremonies, there is music. The main style is Gumba, which is polyrhythmic. It blends diverse local traditions with Portuguese influences. It's also quite known for its fast tempos and complex beats. Speaking of beats, what's the biggest party of the year? That's the Guinea-Bissau Carnival. This is when absolutely everyone comes together. The different ethnic groups all participate in the parades in the capital, showing off unique costumes and mind-blowing masks while performing ancestral dances. It's truly a spectacular symphony where every tribe contributes its unique melody, showing off the nation's rich heritage. And while their old traditions still thrive in today's modern society, I'd like to get your thoughts on something. If you could travel back in time and witness one event, which one would it be? I know it's pretty hard to choose, but sound off in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.